Well, with more on all of this, we're now joined by Bob Fife, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, and Joanna Smith, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press. Good to see both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Bob, I'll begin with you here, because obviously where the primary issue still is China interference and how the government responded to those allegations, there are principal fallouts, primarily, as we just saw there, the Trudeau Foundation. It's an organization dedicated to academic research, but was Beijing trying to buy access with that donation to the Trudeau Foundation?
Well, look, when we first reported about this in 2016, that this billionaire showed up at a Cash for Access fundraiser at a private home where Trudeau was the guest of honor, and then a month later, there's $200,000 to the Trudeau Foundation and $800,000 really to the University of Montreal Law School in the honor of Mr. Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Mm-hmm. It was clear then that it was some kind of an influence operation. This guy appears out of nowhere and starts doling out money. But we didn't really know this until a national security official told us that back in 2014, they captured a conversation between the Chinese billionaire and an unnamed commercial attaché at a Chinese consulate saying, look, there's a chance Trudeau may win. You give them $1 million and we'll reimburse you. So that's the backdrop of this story. And this is not unusual. This is the modus operandi that China uses all over the world. May not work, but they think it does, or they think it's a one method. So it's another example of how China tries to influence or interfere in democracies. So that's the bottom line with that.
Yeah, and it certainly continues to open up the Trudeau government to question. Although, as we heard there, Joanna, from Mark Holland, the Prime Minister has had no involvement with the foundation for about 10 years now. But does that matter if you have a family member still a part of the board?
I think they're in a weird situation where there's this foundation that bears his family name, right? So just on the face of it, for anyone not following all the ins and outs really closely, you think, how could there not be a conflict of interest? And then you learn about other members being on the board. I mean, this was set up to honor his father. We're sort of in a unique situation in Canada where we now have the son of a former prime minister who's also the prime minister. There was some murkiness near the beginning about exactly when his involvement ended. Government House Leader Mark Holland is being a little bit more clear-cut than I think we remember it being at the time. There was a bit of overlap. And I think if the issue was just the foundation bears the name, that would be one thing. That's been true for a very long time. But loading in this highly suspect donation and the very strange response to it, the board is clearly in disarray, clearly trying to figure out how to respond to that. If everything else was fine, I think that would be an easy thing to explain away, but clearly things are not fine, and this adds to it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we have issues, really fishy issues. The public report of the donation listed the two men as giving the money, but the tax receipt, according to the documents we've seen, are not for these two men. It's for a corporation that they are shareholders or directors of. And the first receipt goes to a Hong Kong place, which, by the way, is a shell, sets up shell companies. And then there is a note in the file saying, no, from a state-affiliated association saying, no, send the money to Beijing, the tax receipt to Beijing. What led to all the board resignations is the new president and the newer board members saying, this does not smell right. We need to have a forensic audit and a law firm overseeing
is calling for, and now the organization.
They did do it, but they didn't want. They wanted this to be overlooked by a special committee, not anybody who was there at the time that this happened. And the people who are still on it are Trudeau family friends and are still having a say in terms of this, the terms of reference of the independent audit that's going to be done by the foundation. So the one thing that's good about this is the Auditor General. Mm-hmm. We all know when the Auditor General comes in, they do good work, and we'll accept the findings, whatever they find.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you know what's interesting about this, though, too, is the tentacles of the foundation, because as we know, David Johnston appointed special rapporteur, but he has past affiliations with the Trudeau Foundation, as does Morris Rosenberg, who actually wrote the government report on government interference. So does that put into question, then, the work that has been done and the work that's currently being done by Johnston to get to the bottom of this?
What struck me about the Rosenberg thing was when we spoke to him about it. One of our reporters asked that direct question, what about this? And what I found really interesting about his response, because he was head of the foundation at the time this donation was received, he said back in 2016 there was a different relationship with China and you didn't have to necessarily be on guard for these things. I'm paraphrasing him rather bluntly. But that was what I took away from that. And I found, I mean, Morris Rosenberg is a former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. I found that to be an incredibly surprising and, dare I say, naive characterization of relationship with China in 2016. Did the Trudeau government have more optimistic feelings about it? Sure, they were pursuing a free trade agreement with China. That was before the Two Michaels debacle. But to suggest that these things didn't need to be scrutinized at the time as heavily because things were different, that was pretty surprising. And so yeah, there are things to look out for there. Do I think it puts his report into doubt? Is there a direct connection between Johnson and his work here? No, I think it's a bit of a stretch. At the same time, given the Trudeau government was under such intense pressure to get the appointment of the special rapporteur right, the fact they couldn't find anyone who didn't have that link is surprising, and I think they maybe could have tried a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big country. We could have found somebody who had no link to the Trudeau Foundation, both in investigating Chinese interference in the 2020 election, which is Mr. Rosenberg, and then, of course, David Johnston doing the special rapporteur job. And just may I say the Trudeau Foundation does excellent work. It provides funding for PhD students to do a lot of work. And a lot of it goes to disadvantaged people as well who wouldn't be able to do this. Mm-hmm. So it's good work, but they've got, if they want to go forward, it seems to me, they have to get all the Liberals and all the Trudeau people off this foundation and get in academics and nonpartisans to carry on what is a really good foundation, but it's become, it's been poisoned by these Chinese interference money, this tainted money, and the fact that, frankly, it's been operating as it's very heavily Liberal, very heavily Trudeau family, and it's not their money. They didn't put a dime into this foundation. It was you and me, $125 million.
Yeah. Which makes me wonder, though, because here we are, 2 weeks. There was a 2-week break. We're now back into business. At the end of this 5-week run, which is the time period until the next break, that is when Johnston is meant to present his report to the Prime Minister. Does the timeline change? If it doesn't change, what does it do to the 5 weeks? And sorry to say, we have 30 seconds for each of you on this one.
Well, there's sort of two deadlines, right? One is to say yes or no to a public inquiry, and then a final report later. I can't help but think that timeline of yes or no to the public inquiry was definitely meant to put that issue to rest in the near term. So I think that'll play into the 5 weeks.
This is something to watch it. And
look, if Johnson does not recommend a public inquiry, I think his credibility is just going to go crashing. It's already being questioned. I mean, he is a man of high integrity, but the fact that he would take on a job in a situation where he had just come off serving on the Trudeau Foundation, he should know better than that.
Well, as I said, we are watching very closely. Bob Fife, Joanna Smith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.